The Invader 1. What's up guys, Invader 1 here again, and I wanted to do a challenge for gold as a gold solo, and I wanted to kind of get this challenge done. And I gotta be honest with you, this one was actually a lot of fun. I'm not a big soloer. I do solos here and there, but I'm mostly as challenges from you guys. But I wanted to do this one specifically because I was thinking what will be the most awesome gold solo to do, and this is nothing that hasn't been done before. For example, going flawless on a gold solo, but I wanted to mix a few different challenges at once. I said, well, it would be awesome to do a flawless gold solo. What does that what that means is that I never die. Okay, so that's one. Number one is to do a flawless gold solo. Number two is to not just do it flawlessly, meaning never die, but also use no consumables at all, meaning no rockets, no ops packs, nothing, to make sure that I do it flawless, super flawless, without dying and not using not one consumable. So that was the second part of the challenge. Now the third part of the challenge is everybody's lately been crazy about headshots. I also wanted to make sure I got 20 headshots on wave 1. So I completed all three, guys. So, and this was actually a pretty fun gold solo. I actually had fun doing it, and I have a similar challenge for platinum next, but I wanted to get this one done. I thought it was a lot of fun. It took me a few tries. I think it took me like 3 tries, and I wish I had incendiary rounds 4 to complete it. But anyways guys, I hope you guys enjoy it. Let me show you guys the build real quick. So this is my build for this Batarian Sentinel. For blade armor, I would go for durability rank 4. Rank 5, I went for damage returned. So like that, and especially you'll see there's a few melee kills on some enemies throughout the gameplay. And also rank 6, I went for durability. I wanted to get the damage reduction bonus of 40%, and melee damage return is 250%. So if a husk or anybody melees me or hits me, you know, they get that percentage back at them. For shockwave, I went for force and damage and rank 5 reach. I don't have enough for rank 6, but that's totally fine. Submission net, this is really good power. You definitely want this. So I only have 3 ranks. That's all I need for him. Batarian Enforcer, I'll go for weapon damage and rank 4. Rank 5, I went for headshots because again I wanted to get the 20 headshots on wave 1, and damage and ammo on rank 6 for weapon damage. And fitness, normally I go for I recommend to actually go for all the melee bonuses, because you notice here if I try to melee, I really don't try to melee in this solo because I'm just trying to survive. But in team games, I definitely recommend the melee damage, because like that you can do some really cool heavy melees or light melees and do a lot of damage. But for this solo, I went for survivability, so that's what I went there. In the gameplay, this is what I have. I'm using armor piercing rounds 4, shotgun rearland 2. I didn't have anything higher, and I wish I would have had a cyclonic, but in this situation I didn't have a cyclonic. I went for a shield power cell, and I went for the get scanner. Alright guys, let's go into the gameplay, and I'll say a little bit more about my thoughts behind this. One other thing that I decided to do is choose a weapon that will allow me to be accurate with the headshots that I needed to get on wave 1. So I went with the N7 Crusader. It's a really good shotgun. What I like about it is that it has a lot of damage per shot, and it's actually extremely accurate. It's not a real shotgun. It's more like a sniper rifle, in all honesty, because it doesn't really have the qualities, the real qualities of a shotgun. It doesn't have a spread. It's a slug. It's actually extremely precise, and you have to put the crosshair exactly where you want to shoot. So this was actually fun. You know, I went and used this shotgun and used armor piercing rounds 4 so I could get as much damage as I can. And I went with this character because I wanted to kind of see if I could get the 20 headshot medal on wave 1, and the way I do it is by actually using submission net quite a bit and focusing on the enemies. Now, the enemies that do get headshot bonuses, by the way, on for Reapers, this is against Reapers, are Husks, are Marauders, Cannibals, and by the way, it's very difficult to get a headshot on a Brute, but Brutes actually do have. You can actually hit their head. That's why if you see them when they come at you, they actually cover their heads so that you can't hit them on their head. Then you do get a headshot bonus against them as well. Now the Banshees too. The Banshees, you get a headshot bonus. So that's why if you, let's say you're in a competition like I was just recently on for the headshots, and you have a Banshee, you're not gonna just want to nuke her and get her away from you. You are going to want to actually try to get a headshot on her as well. So anyways, as you see here, the starting of the wave, I actually took advantage because of the first wave. All we have is Marauders, Cannibals. Actually, I think it's just maybe one Marauder and a whole bunch of Cannibals and just a whole bunch of Husks. So I was really trying to be as cautious as possible to actually get the 20 headshots. So that means that even if I had a Cannibal in front of me, but he had his back turned to me, I didn't shoot at him because I didn't want to shoot his back. I want to make sure that I shot his head. So that's how I was able to do it. And you really had to focus to make sure, because to get the 20 headshots, I think they are about, if you do it this way, I think they are about maybe 26, 27 enemies. So you can still, if you miss one, you can still get the 20 headshots. But you want to be as careful as possible. So that's how I did it. And I make sure that I got my headshots off of every Husk, every Marauder, every Cannibal that I could. So that was a lot of fun, guys. And the other thing is that one of the things that I learned, this was actually my third attempt. I would actually get to my previous attempts, I got to wave 9 flawless, but I noticed like at times, especially in wave 9, I got tunnel vision and I will stay stuck just trying to kill a Banshee, and next thing you know, thinking that was the end of the wave, and all of a sudden a Brute would come behind me and stagger me and kill me, and it was just frustrating. So it's one of those kind of situations where, you know, if you're trying to do a challenge like this, you have to be constantly on the move, and you have to adapt to the enemy, and at the same time make sure that you are never just getting too comfortable as to, you know, if believing that there's only one or two enemies left. You have to always think and believe that, you know, it's never the end. So that was it, guys. I actually had a good time doing this one. I really don't enjoy solos too much. I do them for the challenge, and mostly because you guys send me these crazy challenges. But this one was one that I actually challenged myself on. I wanted to get one of these under my belt, a flawless gold solo, and have something unique to it, not just it being flawless, but at the same time using no consumables, and at the same time getting 20 headshots on wave 1. So, yeah, guys, it's not on the history books in the sense of who's got the first flawless gold solo, but I guess this might be the only combination where it's a flawless gold solo, no consumables used, and 20 headshots on wave 1. So far, you know, there you go, guys. Well, here we go. I am going to leave the gameplay on its own. Hopefully you guys will get something out of it. The Batarian Sentinel is a lot of fun to use. And this map, Dagger, is... it's a little tough, by the way, this map, because there are a lot of holes in this map. You would notice a lot of times that Banshees are able to warp me through other parts of the map that they're not supposed to be able to warp me through. This map has a lot of holes, meaning that there are issues with this map. There are places in this map that the enemy can actually shoot through as if there's no wall there. And I could actually point all of them out, because this map, I think, is the worst for that. So it's a really tough solo map for that. It's decent on Platinum, but I may solo this map on Platinum. I'm not exactly sure yet. It's a really tough one. But anyways, guys, I think that's about all I have to say. And I will leave it to it. If you guys got any questions or any other challenge, please put them on the comment box. Please comment, rate, and subscribe. It definitely does help me out, and I appreciate you guys. You guys are always awesome, and thank you for your challenges and always being great subscribers. Take care, guys, and see you guys on the next video.